Okay, hello everybody. My name is Adara. Hold on, actually, let me move my microphone closer. Hello everybody. My name is Adara. I'm your mentor for HTML Camp, and let's just get started. So we are on day 10 of learning HTML now, so that's awesome. Before we even start our camp for today, I just want to thank you guys for joining me throughout this entire thing. Or even if you joined later on, I appreciate it. I hope you're able to learn some new things along the entire way. We have a little bit more to learn today, but I'm just saying in the past as well. I hope you're able to learn and understand everything we've covered so far. And if you have issues on anything, like even from the previous camp days or anything we covered even a long time ago, or maybe even briefly talked about, you can ask them to me in chat and I'll do my best to answer them. With that being said, you've done a great job reaching this far to camp day 10. And let's get started. So we can actually ignore views, but So just reflecting on what we've done so far, here are just some questions we've answered by dedicating just roughly like an hour a week to learning HTML. A lot of the times even less than an hour. We've just answered. This is from camp day 1 to 4, and these are all the questions we answered. I didn't do from camp day 1 to 9 because it was going to be a lot of work to put in all those questions. But I bet you can imagine. So from camp day 1 to 4, we answered all of these questions, and we didn't dedicate that much time to doing it. So really amazing job for you guys to sticking along this far. And yeah, so today we're just going to be focused on adding even more things to our knowledge, just getting smarter on some things. It's going to be a shorter camp day. Also, I apologize if I sound a little bit weird or I sneeze or cough. It's because I have spring allergies and it's like spring now. So although we've learned many things in our HTML camp, it's crazy enough that we've barely even touched the surface of surrounding technology. So in like the whole world of technology, with like all the things that are being discovered each day and just all the things that are already known, what we've learned is not actually a lot. So there's still a lot of learning to do that's going to happen over like the course of probably many years. We're just going to add on and hopefully shorten that list by a little bit today. So the first thing I want to talk about is a website versus a web page. So just basic stuff like this is what we're going to be talking about today and multiple different topics. So in case if you're confused with the difference between a website and a web page, a website is made up of multiple web pages. So a website is something like youtube.com, right? And on youtube.com, when you click on the videos you want to watch, you're on an individual web page, which holds that video and whatever other content related to that video channel and stuff, right? And so it's a single page of content and it's inside of a website. So an entire website would be something like youtube.com and that's it. No youtube.com slash home slash blah, 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 slash blah, blah, blah. So it's like the home page, basically. It's usually the home page. It's the website itself. And it's built up of multiple different web pages. So, continuing on. Next we're going to talk about today is IP addresses. So IP addresses is probably a term you hear a lot if you do something close to computers, I guess, or maybe even if you play games. So an IP address consists of a set of numbers separated by periods. In its simplest terms, an IP address is something that is associated with a specific computer or computer network. So a good analogy for an IP address could be your own phone number because you can use it and reach it to talk to somebody. So a lot of things have IP addresses. Once again, it's just a number associated with a specific computer or computer network. If you're using the internet right now, you can search up on your own computer. I won't do this here. You can search up on your own computer, what is my IP address, and you'll be able to see it. So it looks something like this, and that's called a public IP address because that's what other people will see when you connect to them and they're outside of your like internet. So these are what IP addresses commonly look like. There are different versions of IP addresses like IP version 4 and IP version 6, which is a newer one. The reason we have newer IP addresses is because since there's so many devices now that are using internet and stuff, IPv4, which is the one that looks like this, we're running out of combinations that allow us to create more IPv4 addresses. So we're almost at the max. And with IPv6 addresses, once again, v6 just represents the version, so it's version 6. Those pretty much are longer by a little bit, so they give more options for IP addresses, and we're not limited by those ones at all. I don't remember how many devices you can have connected, but you can have a lot connected. In fact, maybe I'll show you. One second, please, as I search this up. Okay, yeah, so it can make up to like 340 trillion IP addresses, which is great. So that's why it's replacing IPv4. So anyways, yeah, so hopefully this makes a little bit of sense about an IP address. Your computer, if it's connected to a network, it will probably have like maybe, it'll probably have its own private IP address as well. And that's just for people to talk to you within your own network. But anyways, relating to IP addresses, we're going to be talking about computer networks in general. So what is a computer network? You've probably heard this term as well. So it's possible to connect multiple computers together to create a computer network. The computers which are part of the network can talk to each other and exchange information. So an example of a computer network you might have in your own home is something like maybe your computer and your printer, or your phone and your printer. So just multiple devices that can talk to each other and exchange information. And once again, if they're inside a private network like this, they also have a private IP address. So those usually start with like 192.168. So those are private IP addresses. And yeah, another example of a computer network, maybe you even just have two of your devices talking to each other. They can be exchanging something. You have, I already said phone and printer. There's a lot of examples. So it's basically literally anything that you could imagine where it would require two devices to talk to each other under computer networks where it allows two devices to talk to each other pretty much. I don't know how to put that any more simple. It doesn't need to have a lot of devices, but yeah, it's created once a device and another device are connected and they're able to talk to each other. So so next we're going to be talking about domain names. So this kind of brings us back to the IP address thing we were talking about earlier. So a domain name is an address where on the internet, a domain name is the address where internet users can access your website. So for example, that means something like google.com or youtube.com or yahoo.com. I'm just saying a lot of the basic websites, but yeah. So domain names are used in URLs to identify particular web pages. All domain names are connected to a unique IP address. And the reason for that is because when we're connecting to that domain name, we're connecting to that IP address, which kind of tells you that that's connected to like a device or something. So something that's behind the IP address, which is a server. So we use domain names because they're easier to remember than IP addresses. That's the only reason. So something you can actually do, if you find the IP address for a website you use, you're actually able to type in the IP address in your web browser search bar instead of having to type in the domain name. So that's another way you can do it. But the reason we want to do this is because we can kind of compare it back to that phone analogy we were talking about earlier. For example, maybe you have to call one of your parents. You probably have them saved as a contact on your phone. Maybe it's mom or dad or whatever. So pretty much if you're to be typing in the IP addresses, it'd be equivalent to you having to type in your mom and dad's phone number each time you wanted to call them, right? So it's much easier to just have those contacts that you can remember better, or you can just type them in and search them out. So yeah, I'll just say this analogy properly in case it didn't make sense. So when you want to call someone, you usually click on the contact's name rather than typing in the full number. So domain names are just like the contact in your phone. Instead of typing an IP address into your browser, you type the domain name. So hopefully that makes sense. So here's an example of a domain name. It's within this URL. And in this case, it is learningwithme.org. So that's how we can use it to identify like a website or, So after that, it's just more information to where this URL is taking us. And yeah. So if you're going to create your own website and actually put it up on the internet, we haven't discussed how to do that. But to do this, something important is that you're going to need a domain name for your website. And usually your domain name is also the same name as your actual website. Because it'd be weird if something like YouTube changed their domain name, so what you would type into Twitch, right? So it's important that you have a good domain name, and most likely you also want it to match your like brand title or whatever. So yeah, we're gonna look into IP addresses a bit more. We're also going to look in domain names also. So if you could just give me a second, I'm gonna load something up. I'm gonna load up some examples I can show. And yeah, so 1 second, please. Let me see if I have it open already. No, okay, so I do not. So 1 second, please. Let me see, how do I want to do this? Okay, let me get an IP address for a website and I'll show that off. Just 1 second, please. Sorry for this delay. Let me put this back on my keyboard. Okay, there we go. I'll use this one. Make sure it works. Okay, so maybe we won't do that example then. Let's just continue on. So let's see, you guys can see this screen. So 1 second, I'm going to share a different screen now, and we'll continue on with our example. Okay, there we go. So hopefully you guys, hold on actually. There you go. Hopefully you guys can see my screen again. Everything's working. So yeah, a website where you can go purchase a domain name, because that's what you have to do. You actually have to basically rent it out. But a website where you can go and do this is GoDaddy.com. And that's actually their domain name for their website. And yeah, so type that in, and on the website you can just, it's very simple. You just buy and sell, or no, you don't sell. You just buy domain names here. Or at least I don't believe you sell. Maybe you can sell. So how the website operates is that you basically get to type in a domain name and see if it's available. And that's what we're going to do. So I want to see if Dairy.com is available, because that's what I want to call my website. So Dairy.com. And by the way, all these, I wouldn't call them extensions, but all these things at the end, all these .net and all these, what do I say? All these extensions at the end of our, it's a part of our domain name, but all these extensions at the end, these only serve the use of helping to identify what's on the website as well, usually. So for example, .ca represents that it's a Canadian website. .com represents that it's used for commercial uses. .net represents network. .org represents it's an organization. And yeah, they usually just have things associated with them like that. So the popular one, the really popular one is .com, because it just is used a lot. Okay, so it tells me that a Dairy.com is taken, but I can find alternates below. So Dairy.ca is available, a Dairy.net is available, and all these ones are also available. So there are multiple endings. The Dairy.io is available, and yeah. So you would acquire a domain, and you'd have to go and attach it to to the IP address where your website's being hosted as well, and that would allow you to have a domain name basically, or it's basically just putting up a whole website itself. So you need a domain name. So those are pretty much domain names. Usually I have a more thorough example because people would ask me to search up things for them. But yeah, so I can search up something else. So just keep going with this example. So if I search up google.com because I wanted google.com, I find out that it is probably, of course, taken because we already know google.com and we know it's being hosted there. So yeah, google.com's taken, and it shows us a bunch of other examples that I guess are premium. So what makes something that, so domain names can range in prices usually in different websites. And what makes those range in prices is basically how, I don't even know how to put this. I'll give an example. So if you ever played a video game, maybe it's Roblox, maybe it's like a Steam game on Steam or something, or just any game. Usually, like having a very simple username, like a username on Roblox, like John, is really impossible to get, right? Because that means you would have had to been there the first day it probably came out, and you would have had to been the person who chose the name John, because you can only get a username once. So on domain names, it kind of works kind of similarly as well. There are different, like I guess, uh, levels of domain names. So a really nice and simplistic domain name that's like a real world, a real word, and has no numbers and letter, or has no numbers and stuff. That's considered a more valuable domain name. So if you get a domain name like this, if I say I want this domain name.com, we'll find out, yeah, they're going to, of course, say that this is probably available. And they're also going to sell it to me for very cheap as well, right? But if I want a premium domain name, when I saw google.com, it showed me other examples. So let's see. Google.com. I want a premium domain name. I guess these are what are considered premium. So internet.com, you can imagine that's kind of going to be a premium domain name. They're going to ask for a lot of money, right? Something.com or somewhere.com or searching.com, just a lot of things. So these are all considered premium domain names just because of basically like how hard it would be to actually get them on a normal thing without having to pay the normal fee. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense, and hopefully that doesn't confuse you on why you see some domain name for like $12,000 and another one for $2. Because it's kind of like if you were buying an account for a game that had the username. If you're buying a Roblox account that had the username Roblox, you'd imagine that'd probably be worth a lot, right? But yeah, so hopefully that makes sense on everything we've covered so far. So that's domain name. So on to our last thing we're going to cover. I know it's a very short camp today, but we honestly don't have that much content to cover. But on to our last thing. Just give me a second again, and I'll share my screen there. I'm going to search up something and see if I can find a simple example. Because we're not going to go deep into it. I just want to show a simple example so we can look into it. One second, please. Anyways, if you have any questions, even as I'm doing this, if you put them in chat, I'll do my best to answer them. I just noticed my camera's a little bit crooked. Let me fix that. So let me just check here. I'll just try to explain it myself, honestly. So let's go back to the presentation. I'll just try to explain focusing mostly myself. So 1 second. I know you guys can't see my screen yet. Just give me a second. Okay, so hopefully you guys can see my screen again. Yeah, so let's just go back to this page, I guess. I'll talk about what I want to talk about. Pit Adere. Sorry, maybe that question was delayed. I'm only seeing that now. Is that related to the domain name thing I was talking about? Yeah, if you want me to try it, you can put a domain name in chat that you want me to test out, and I'll test it out afterwards. So yeah, put a domain name you'd like me to try and chat, and I'll test it out for you if you like. I'll still give you the link to where you can find it. But anyways, what I wanted to talk about, so this mostly is going to be me speaking for this part. This is going to be the last topic we talk about for today. So putting up your own website. So putting up your own website is kind of a weird thing to do. So probably the first step is to actually build your website and know how it's going to operate, right? And we've learned HTML, so we're able to do that now. So I'm going to be very broad about this. Maybe you can replay this and you can go figure out how to do it as well yourself if you really want to. So after you have the contents for your website, the next thing you need to do is basically, I keep saying weird words. So basically acquire your domain name. So your domain names, once again, you need one for your website. It's what the users are going to see. And it's a very important part for attracting viewers to your website, right? The next thing, after you have your domain name, you need to host your web server somehow, or you need to host a web server or your website, basically. So to do that, it gets more complicated. If you want to host your website yourself, it's pretty expensive. It's not doable for some people. And yeah, so usually what people do is that they go to web hosting services. So I'll search for web hosting service. So web hosting services. Let's see, I'm trying to look at the best web hosting services, and we'll have one out there. So let's look at A2 hosting. I've heard of those ones. So A2 hosting, okay, these guys will host your website for you on their server for you. So you can see what they're trying to advertise. Your website hosting provider is a huge amount of your load speed. Bottom line, that's because you have to they're trying to get you. They're trying to sell a product, but pretty much as you can see here, they have subscriptions. So let's even look at them. So you're talking about, I guess, the speed of the server, so how fast your website will load on your end, and just a lot of things. So yeah, these guys, you'd go to them, they'd help you host your server, and once they're hosting or once they kind of have that set up, you'll also give a domain name to point to your hosted server or whatever. And that will make it so that your website is up and running. So this is something you have to pay for. Once again, you can do it yourself, and it might be even more expensive than just paying one of these services to do it for you. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. So it's going to be a little bit broad, but pretty much step one, build your website. Step two, get your domain name. Step three, host your website. I'd probably just say go with a service. So find a service to host your website with. Let's see. So I can even say, what is A2 hosting? So yeah, their main advertising is that they're very speedy, so their servers are very fast, and yeah. So A2's core goal is to create and maintain such a good web hosting service that the staff want to use themselves. Okay, so yeah, hopefully that's a little bit clear as well. So somebody put Adere on the domain name server. So this is GoDaddy is not the only one. There are other ones as well. So I can just type in probably buy domain and I can see other websites. But GoDaddy is one of the places you can go to. So I can go to register a domain name, just a different website. They also sell them to you, and I can type in whatever I want. But I'll, of course, still get the same results. If I try google.com here, of course, google.com is still taken, so it doesn't matter. And yeah, we can even see when I was registered, and awesome. So next one, I can even try something like, let's say, okay, yeah, somebody said Adere, so I'll try that one last time. So I'm just typing in Adere, and you can see ending results for it. So I see .net, I see .app, .tv, .cc, .co. There's just a lot of things. And they're trying to charge a lot of money for .co. But yeah, hopefully that makes sense. So just as a quick summary of what we covered today, After that, we're going to wrap up the camp because it doesn't look like we have any questions. But yeah, so quick summary. First, we talked about websites versus web pages. As we know now, a website is built up of multiple web pages, and that's what makes a website. Then we talked about IP addresses. So IP address is basically like a phone number for your computer, right? How can it be contacted? You can have a private IP address, which means it's in your own tiny network, or you can have a public IP address, which is what you need to go access the internet. And yeah, so next thing we learned about was computer networks. So a computer network is just multiple computers together talking to each other. You only need two computers to make a computer network. An example was a phone maybe connected with your printer. Those have already basically established a network to now, and those can see each other and talk to each other. So in this case, it's probably going to be your phone talking to your computer and telling it to print out like a document or something. Then we talked about domain names. So domain name, it's important step into actually putting up your website on the internet. So domain name is the address for where users can access your website. Remember how we can buy domain names online. What basically helps the pricing of domain names. And once again, to add on to those pricing of domain names, if the username is more simple, if the domain name is more simple, it's also going to be easier for your website visitors to type in on their web browser, and it just helps to build a better experience for them and also increases your chances of having more visitors on your website. But yeah, so yeah, we use domain names because they're easier to remember than IP addresses. That's what we remember. So we connect it to like a public IP address, and we have that being hosted on some web server. And yes, we can host it ourselves, or we can go to a service to do that for us. But hosting yourselves once again can be costly. So we showed domain name examples. And yeah, that was pretty much all we covered for today's camp. So if you don't have any questions, if nobody has any questions, and that's all, I can actually say that's pretty much the end of today's camp. We've covered everything I want to cover. So I want to thank you guys once again for joining me throughout this entire thing. Thank you for sticking along for the ride. I hope you were able to learn how to do some new things in HTML, or I hope you were able to accomplish what you wanted to accomplish in this camp. And yeah, so once again, really thank you for joining me. Hope you learned something new. And that's pretty much wrapping up this camp. So maybe, actually, before I end it, I'll talk about one last thing. So after this camp, if you're wondering what to do next, maybe you really didn't care about building web pages that much, or maybe you just were neutral about it. You didn't have any emotions toward it. And maybe you think you're interested in doing other things, like maybe building games or building like web applications or just other things, or learning how to program with different languages. We do have other camps on that as well. So we have a Python camp and we have a Pygame camp, or pretty much Python game development camp. So in the Python camp, you'll just learn how to code with a language called Python. And in the Python games camp, you'll learn how to specifically use that language to build games, which is pretty cool. And Python is also a really popular language right now, and it's very high in demand. So if you're done here and you think you don't care about HTML and CSS that much, you can move on to that. But if you think you really loved doing web development and things, some next steps for you to go on are to go and pick up another language related to HTML and CSS. If we remember that language, JavaScript, it's a scripting language. That's very important for building a web page. And maybe you can even get better with your CSS. There's still a lot more to learn with HTML as well. We didn't finish up with that really, because you can never really finish up. There's just a lot more you can learn, and you can get better at doing that as well. And once you get good enough, you can build your dream website and put it online. But yeah, those are just some maybe paths I have for you guys to go take. Of course, if not, you can just abandon the whole thing as well. So yeah, I'm also the mentor of the Python camp, the Python Standard Camp. So you'll see me there as well if you want to be taught Python. And yeah, you can do a lot of cool things with it. You can build a lot of cool applications with it. So it's not for building websites, but it's for building like more standard desktop applications. And you can also even use it for web stuff too. But we'll be looking at what we can use for desktop. So finally now, I'm going to actually end it this time. So thank you for joining me, guys. I appreciate it a lot. And hopefully I'll see you around. So goodbye.